And she was coming back to claim her throne. Damon Westwood, a man who built his reputation on ruthless ambition and charm, had planned every single detail. The tuxedo, tailored in Milan, the glistening diamond watch, and the young model clinging to his arm, each piece was part of the performance. He wanted the world to see him not as a man who had discarded his wife, but as a king ascending to a higher throne. The model at his side, Serafina Lane, was everything the tabloids adored. Barely 26, a social media darling with legs that seemed endless, her sequin dress shimmered under the city lights like liquid gold. To Damon, she was more than a lover. She was an ornament, proof that he had traded ordinary for extraordinary. That ordinary was Isabella Grant, his ex-wife, the woman he had once promised eternity, but discarded when her quiet elegance no longer fed his insatiable ego. "Tonight, my love," Damon whispered to Serafina as they stepped from the limousine, "they'll all remember us." The entrance of the Waldorf was a blinding storm of camera flashes. But the moment he reached the velvet rope, that pride shattered into a million pieces. "Name, sir?" "Westwood. Damon Westwood." "I'm sorry, Mr. Westwood. Your name isn't on the list." "Check again. I'm a personal donor to the foundation. I'm always on the list." The guard's expression didn't soften. Around them, the crowd stirred, sensing blood in the water. Paparazzi continued snapping photos, delighted at the escalating tension. Serafina clutched his arm tighter, her lips curving into an uncertain pout. "This is absurd," Damon barked, his voice loud enough to draw even more attention. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yes, sir. That's exactly why your name was removed." The words landed like a physical slap. Removed. Not forgotten. Removed. Behind them, whispers rose like venomous smoke. Gasps echoed through the air. Her gown was midnight silk, flowing like water with each step she took. Diamonds draped her neck, catching the light as though the stars themselves bowed to her presence. Her hair, once worn in simple buns and quiet braids, now cascaded in soft, glamorous waves, styled to perfection. The wife Damon had discarded. The woman he had laughed at when she wept, calling her weak, plain, and outdated. "Isabella, who are you wearing?" "Honored guest." Just months ago, she had been nothing in his eyes, tucked away in their suburban home, invisible in the circles he now craved. Damon tried to step forward, to push past the guard, but the man's hand pressed firmly against his chest. "Step back, sir. Only honored guests tonight." She walked past as if he were nothing more than a stranger in the crowd. Her head was held high, her arm elegantly linked with another man, Ethan Blackwell, the elusive billionaire whose name was spoken with reverence in every boardroom. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Damon wasn't the king tonight. He was the fool outside the castle gates. "Isabella, wait." She paused only for the cameras, gifting them a serene, knowing smile before gliding through the hotel doors with Ethan. Inside, music swelled, chandeliers glimmered, and a wave of applause erupted as the announcer's voice declared, "Please welcome our honored guest of the evening, Mrs. Isabella Grant." The last sound Damon heard was the thunder of clapping hands clapping for the woman he thought he had broken. Outside, beneath the flashing, merciless cameras, Damon Westwood realized he wasn't just denied entry to a gala. Before the dazzling entrance at the gala, before the cameras screamed her name, Isabella Grant had been nothing more than a ghost in her own marriage. To Damon, she was a stepping stone, someone to polish his image when he was climbing, and someone to discard once he reached the heights. He was charming, driven, and spoke to her with a tenderness that convinced her they were partners destined to conquer life together. They married quickly, swept up in what felt like destiny. She supported his late nights, endured the constant financial pressure, and even pawned her grandmother's locket to help fund his first project. But when success finally came, so did the shadows. He stopped asking about her drawings, her ideas, her passions. Slowly, Isabella went from being a wife to being an accessory. The cruelest wound came one rainy evening. She waited, the food growing cold, her heart beating with a fragile hope. "Damon," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Where have you been? Stop acting like a desperate housewife, Isabella. You're boring. I need someone who excites me." That was the night she realized the man she had built her life around had already left her emotionally, if not legally. Isabella, 6 months into trying to salvage their marriage, arrived only to see Damon at a table with Serafina Lane. When Isabella approached, Damon didn't hide. She left that night, not just humiliated, but utterly destroyed. Their home, once filled with her laughter, became a prison of silence. The world whispered behind her back. Poor Isabella. She wasn't enough. Friends faded away. Even family members looked at her with pity. For months, Isabella withdrew. She would stare at the ceiling, asking herself, was I really so unworthy? Did I mean nothing? But somewhere in the ruins of her heartbreak, something hardened. That was when Ethan Blackwell entered her life. Ethan had been a silent observer in their world for years. One afternoon, as Isabella sat at a quiet cafe sketching in her notebook, Ethan appeared. He didn't come with pity. He didn't offer hollow words. But Ethan didn't push. Instead, he offered opportunities. She wore confidence like armor, slowly at first, then with conviction. The world that once mocked her now started to take notice. Her designs appeared in magazines. Still, she kept her transformation quiet. She knew Damon's arrogance blinded him. He thought she had faded into obscurity. And that was what made the gala so important. It was the night Isabella would step fully into the light. She wasn't coming to watch from the shadows. She was coming as the honored guest. Her grace would be undeniable. For Damon, it would be the ultimate humiliation. For Isabella, it would be the final proof that she had not been broken. But the journey had only just begun. A man who built his empire on control would never accept being overshadowed, especially by the woman he had thrown away. And Isabella had no idea just how far Damon would go to claw back his power. The Waldorf Astoria had always been more than a hotel. Outside, Damon Westwood had already tasted humiliation at the Velvet Rope. But inside, the story was entirely different. For those admitted, the night was an intoxicating blur of music, champagne, and opportunity. Waiters in crisp white jackets carried silver trays of caviar, truffle canapés, and glasses of cristal. The air buzzed with the scent of designer perfume, the murmur of calculated conversations, and the clicking of camera shutters. The honored guest is Isabella Grant, the announcer had declared, and for a moment, the ballroom seemed to exhale in collective surprise. Who's that with her? His presence alone commanded silence. Tall, broad-shouldered, his silver cufflinks catching the light, Ethan was the kind of man who didn't need to speak to be respected. But tonight, it was Isabella who shone brightest. But it wasn't the jewels or the fabric that made her unforgettable. It was the way she carried herself. The room bent around her presence. "Mrs. Grant, you honor us," said the chairwoman of the gala, rushing to greet her. "It's a privilege to give back," she said, her voice steady, her tone elegant. "Tonight isn't about me. It's about the children we're here to support." The cameras loved her. Each image was destined for the front pages of tomorrow's society columns. Serafina pouted beside him. Damon clenched his jaw. But deep inside, he knew. Isabella was ushered to the head table, placed beside Ethan, and across from senators, actors, and royalty. The master of ceremonies praised her philanthropy, announcing her as one of the largest benefactors of the night. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. The irony was exquisitely cruel. Damon had once mocked her for doing nothing while he worked. Now the world was celebrating her for doing everything he could not. She saw the same faces who had once pitied her, whispering when Damon left her for Serafina. Tonight, those same lips curved into expressions of admiration, envy, and even awe. She caught the eye of Margaret Langford, a society matron who had once told her, "You'll just fade without Damon." Now, Margaret was clapping for her. Yet beneath the applause, a storm was brewing. Damon was not the kind of man to accept humiliation quietly. Finally unable to stand it any longer, he shoved past the guard at the entrance. A hush fell as the uninvited stormed into the temple of the elite. "Damon," someone whispered. "He wasn't supposed to be here." "Isabella," he bellowed, his face red with rage. "What are you doing here?" The room froze. She didn't flinch. She didn't cower. Instead, she rose with measured grace, her gown flowing like a midnight tide around her. "Mr. Westwood," she said, her voice calm, but sharp enough to slice through the silence. "I believe you're not on the guest list." Gasps erupted, and cameras flashed wildly. Ethan rose beside her, his expression like steel, ready to shield her from whatever storm Damon was about to unleash. Serafina tried to tug him back, whispering, "Stop, Damon. Everyone's watching." The orchestra's music had died. Because Damon wasn't here to apologize. He was here to destroy her. This was not the role he had scripted for himself. Instead, he was the intruder. And there, across from him, stood Isabella. The woman he had dismissed as fragile now looked like a goddess of vengeance. Her gown shimmered under the chandeliers, and her calm demeanor only intensified his rage. To Damon, her silence was worse than insults. It was mockery. It was power. "Isabella," his voice thundered again, echoing across the marble walls. Gasps rippled through the audience. "I don't belong?" she asked, her voice smooth but commanding. Strange. The organizers thought otherwise. Perhaps you should take that up with them. The one thing he craved more than wealth was control. Control of his image. Control of his narrative. And now, all of it was slipping through his fingers in front of hundreds of witnesses. Serafina tugged at his sleeve, her golden dress shimmering as she tried to pull him back. "Damon, please, not here. People are staring." Some guests muttered under their breath. The cracks in Damon's charm, once hidden, now showed like broken glass under a bright light. Ethan Blackwell rose from his chair, tall and composed, his very presence enough to silence a room. His voice was calm, steady, but every word carried authority. Damon sneered. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Someone who doesn't need to scream to be heard." The words hit Damon like a punch. He had always hated Ethan, envied his effortless power, the way people deferred to him without question. Damon had spent years clawing for recognition while Ethan simply commanded it by existing. It was salt in an already festering wound. Even Serafina flinched, realizing how ugly his words sounded. Isabella, however, didn't flinch. "I was never nothing. I only forgot my worth because I believed in you. But that mistake ends tonight." People clapped quietly, some even nodding. Damon's jaw tightened until it looked like it might snap. His image, his power, his very identity was unraveling before him. The master of ceremonies, flustered but determined, tried to restore order. "Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps we can." But Damon cut him off, his desperation boiling over. Ethan's voice sliced through Damon's rant like a blade. He stepped closer, his height towering over Damon's smaller frame. The audience held its breath. He saw the stares judging, mocking, dismissing him as a fool. This was the nightmare he had never imagined, to be the villain in the story he had once authored. Isabella was the weak wife. Damon was the unstoppable mogul. But tonight, the script was ripped from his hands. Still, his pride refused to bow. Then, with a dramatic turn, He stormed out of the ballroom, Serafina scurrying after him, her golden dress catching on a chair as she nearly tripped in her haste. The door slammed behind them, but the echo of his words lingered. She had expected tension, perhaps even confrontation, but not this level of public venom. Damon had always been ruthless. What if he truly meant his threat? She nodded, forcing a small smile, but inside she felt the tremor of unease. Damon was humiliated, and a humiliated man was a dangerous one. Guests returned to their seats, though the tension still hung heavy in the air. Isabella sat back down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not as Damon's discarded wife, but as her own person. Yet, the pit in her stomach reminded her that this was only round one. Because Damon wasn't finished. Every newspaper, every society blog, every gossip column carried the same story. By contrast, Damon's furious face, caught mid-yell, became a meme overnight. Talk about karma. That model looks like she wants to disappear. The tide of public opinion turned fast. For years, Damon had been praised as a self-made mogul, admired for his charm and ambition. Damon's penthouse, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cage. He paced the marble floors. "Damon," she whimpered. "They're calling me a gold digger. They're saying I ruined your marriage. This is humiliating." "Shut up." Damon snapped, his voice sharp with venom. Damon's eyes blazed. And he meant it. Within days, Damon's PR team launched a counterattack. Anonymous tips were leaked to gossip sites, claiming Isabella had been unfaithful during their marriage. Old photographs of her with male colleagues were twisted into scandalous stories. The whispers spread quickly. "Maybe Isabella isn't so innocent," some muttered at luncheons. Perhaps Damon was justified in leaving her. Isabella felt the shift almost immediately. The woman who had just begun to rebuild her dignity was suddenly thrust back into the storm of judgment. At first, she tried to ignore it. She focused on her architectural projects, buried herself in charity work, and reminded herself that truth always prevailed. But the gossip grew louder. Paparazzi followed her to the grocery store, cameras flashing as they shouted, "Isabella, are you sleeping with Ethan Blackwell? Did you cheat on Damon?" Even her work partners grew hesitant, worried about being caught in a scandal. She buried her face in her pillow, her shoulders shaking with the weight of betrayal. She thought of the years she had wasted on Damon, the love she had poured into a man who only ever saw her as disposable. Now, even in freedom, his shadow loomed, poisoning everything she touched. Maybe the world was right. Maybe she was weak. Maybe she was nothing without him. But then her phone buzzed. "Don't let him win. Meet me tomorrow. I have something to show you." The next day, she found herself in Ethan's sleek Manhattan office. Ethan studied her carefully, his sharp eyes softening. "Damon's poisoning everyone against me. He's spreading lies, and I don't know how much more I can take." Ethan slid a folder across the desk. "Open it." Inside were documents, financial reports, legal filings, photographs. His last 3 real estate deals were disasters propped up by borrowed money and falsified numbers. Investors were pulling out. Lawsuits were looming. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in Isabella's chest. But that hope came with a sliver of fear. "Ethan, if you expose him, he'll come after us both. He's already furious with me." The question hung heavy in the air. That taste of dignity burned brighter than her fear. Ethan nodded, a rare smile tugging at his lips. The words filled her veins with fire. For the first time, Isabella felt not like a victim, but like a warrior sharpening her blade. That very night, Damon placed a phone call to a journalist notorious for destroying reputations. "Every secret, every mistake, every scar. I don't care how much it costs. I want her ruined. And the journalist's reply made Damon smile for the first time in weeks. "Oh, Mr. Westwood, I already have something that will finish her." It was a full-page exposé dripping with venom, splashed across the most notorious gossip blog in New York. The truth about Isabella Grant, manipulator, opportunist, mistress. The story painted Isabella not as the dignified philanthropist the world had seen at the gala, but as a woman who had supposedly clawed her way up through deception. Anonymous sources claimed she had seduced Ethan Blackwell to secure her honored guest position. Old photos of her laughing with male colleagues were presented as evidence of affairs. Radio hosts mocked her. Gold digger. Snake. Isabella sat in her apartment, the glow of her phone burning her eyes as comment after comment poured in. Every word felt like a stone thrown against her chest. How could people believe this? How could the world so easily forget what they had seen with their own eyes at the gala? Her hands shook as she shut her laptop, pressing her palms against her temples. She curled into herself on the couch, memories flashing through her mind, Damon's cold words, Serafina's mocking smirk, the humiliation at dinners where she had been invisible. The tears came, hot and unrelenting. She thought she had finally broken free of that lie. But now, it seemed like the world believed it again. That night, Isabella barely slept. When she did, nightmares haunted her. Damon's voice jeered in the darkness. "You'll always be nothing, Bella. No dress, no diamonds, no billionaire can change that." For 2 days, she hid. She ignored calls, shut out friends, and even avoided Ethan. Shame wrapped around her like chains, heavier than ever before. It was late afternoon when the sound echoed through her apartment. Reluctantly, she opened the door, and there stood Ethan Blackwell. He stepped inside without waiting for permission, holding a folder in one hand and a sleek tablet in the other. His tone wasn't accusing, just factual. Isabella looked away. "I can't fight him, Ethan. He'll never stop. Every time I rise, he finds a way to drag me down." Ethan set the folder on the coffee table, his gaze steady. "Proof." He tapped the tablet, pulling up a series of documents, financial reports, internal memos, even confidential emails. Damon paid for that article. He bought those lies. But more than that, his empire is collapsing. The debts, the falsified numbers, the investors fleeing. It's all here. He's drowning, Isabella. And when the world sees this, no rumor about you will matter. Her heart skipped a beat. "How did you get this?" Ethan allowed himself a faint smile. Every page was another nail in Damon's coffin. He was crumbling. Even if this is true, what if he spins it? He always spins everything. What if he blames me again? Ethan leaned closer, his voice low but powerful. Something shifted inside her then. Damon was. Now, the world would see the truth. It came from Ethan's next words. "There's something else you need to know," he said, sliding a photograph from the folder. Both of them were laughing in front of a penthouse apartment. Ethan nodded. "The woman he left you for, the one he parades around, isn't loyal to him. She's been undermining him all along. Damon's biggest humiliation hasn't even hit him yet." For the first time in weeks, Isabella laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but it was real. A release of the tension that had strangled her. Damon, the man who had thrown her away for a younger model, was about to be betrayed by that very woman. Her despair melted away into something sharper, determination. She straightened her shoulders, wiping the remnants of tears from her face. Then it's time the world sees the real Damon Westwood. Together, they began to plan. But as Isabella prepared herself for the battle ahead, a chill lingered. Damon was cornered, and cornered men were dangerous. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope. Because across town, Damon was on the phone again, his voice raw with rage. "You said you had something on her, he hissed to the journalist. That wasn't enough. I want more. I want something that ends her completely. The journalist's reply was calm, almost amused. Don't worry, Mr. Westwood. Tomorrow morning, the world will know a secret Isabella Grant never wanted anyone to see. The morning sun filtered weakly through Isabella's curtains, but its warmth couldn't touch the chill inside her. Dozens of notifications had flooded in, texts, emails, calls. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the phone. She clicked the article, her eyes scanning the venomous words. When Isabella was in her early 20s, Maria had struggled with addiction. Damon had been merciless. You want to save her? You'll only drown with her. No one knew if she had survived. Isabella had carried the guilt silently, convinced she had failed her sister, ashamed of the chaos Maria had brought into her pristine marriage. She had never spoken of it publicly, never admitted the depth of her heartbreak. And now, Damon had twisted that painful chapter into a weapon. The article claimed Isabella had abandoned her sister to protect her social standing. It painted her as cold, heartless, and willing to sacrifice family for image. By midday, paparazzi were camped outside her building, shouting, Isabella, did you abandon your sister? Is it true you never helped her? He's destroyed me this time, she whispered. This isn't gossip about dresses or affairs. This is my family. My shame. Ethan's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, his voice steady. She shook her head violently. People don't care about the truth. They care about the story. And the story right now is that I'm a monster. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. Finally, he said, then tell them your story. Not his. Yours. But as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she saw not pity, but conviction. It was the kind of conviction she once thought Damon had, but he never truly did. Slowly, she began to write. She wrote about Maria, about the nights she sat by her sister's hospital bed, about the endless attempts to save her. And she wrote about love, the kind of love that doesn't disappear even when people do. The next morning, instead of hiding, Isabella stood before the press. Her hands shook as she stepped up to the podium, the cameras blinding, the microphones crowding her. For a heartbeat, she wanted to run. But then she remembered Ethan's words. Don't let him define the story. Tell your own. Her voice cracked at first, but it grew steadier with every word. Yes, I have a sister. Yes, she struggled. And yes, I tried to save her. I tried until it broke me, but I never abandoned her. I never stopped loving her. The truth is, addiction destroys families. It nearly destroyed mine. But that doesn't make me heartless. It makes me human. Others leaned closer, captivated. Isabella took a breath, her eyes glistening but unashamed. I'm not perfect. I've been broken, humiliated, and discarded. But I've also risen. And I will not apologize for surviving. Not from everyone, but from enough. For the first time, Isabella wasn't just admired. She was relatable. He had expected her to crumble, to disappear in disgrace. Instead, she had turned his weapon into her shield. But Damon didn't know what was coming. Because that night, Ethan called Isabella with news that would change everything. We found her, he said softly. Isabella's breath caught. Ethan's voice was steady. Your sister, Maria. She's alive. Because the one secret Damon thought would ruin her might become the very thing that saves her. For a long moment, Isabella couldn't breathe. We found her. Your sister, Maria, is alive. Tears welled in her eyes, not of despair this time, but of something deeper, something she hadn't dared to feel in years, hope. Ethan's tone softened. Yes. She's in a recovery center upstate. She's been clean for nearly a year. Isabella. She asked about you. She had imagined Maria gone so many times that believing in her survival felt dangerous. But now, the possibility was real. The next day, Isabella traveled to the center. As she walked down the sterile white hallway, her heart raced. At the end of the corridor, in a sunlit room, Maria sat by a window, her dark hair tied back, her figure thinner, but her eyes alive. When their gazes met, time seemed to stop. Maria's lips trembled into a smile. Years of guilt, pain, and longing dissolved in that single embrace. For years, Isabella had carried shame like a chain, believing Damon's words that she had failed as a sister, as a woman. But now, seeing Maria alive and healing, she realized the truth. Love had never abandoned her. It had endured, even through the darkness. She no longer moved like a woman trying to prove her worth. She moved like a woman who knew it. She began preparing not just to survive Damon's attacks, but to finish them once and for all. At first, Isabella hesitated. For years, she had been told to stay quiet, stay small. Bold, daring, unapologetic. Gone was the discarded wife. You look like power, Bella. Like everything Damon was afraid of. Isabella smiled, her heart steady. She studied Damon's financial records with Ethan, preparing to expose him with precision. Every move had to be calculated. Ethan watched her closely, often with an admiration that lingered longer than words. I'm not rewriting it. I'm taking it back. His investors fled, his project stalled, and whispers of fraud grew louder. But instead of retreating, Damon doubled down. He hosted extravagant parties, parading Serafina on his arm, trying desperately to mask his decline. Damon planned to use it as his redemption, a chance to prove he still belonged among the elite. One evening, she returned to the recovery center with Maria. They sat by the window, snowflakes falling outside, the silence wrapping around them like a blanket. Bella, promise me something. Promise me that when you stand on that stage, you're not just fighting Damon. Promise me you're fighting for yourself, for us. Outside the venue, the city glowed with lights, limousines lining the street, paparazzi swarming like bees. Damon arrived first, Serafina glittering beside him, his smile wide but strained. Then, the room shifted. Please welcome our guest of honor, Isabella Grant. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed like lightning. She didn't walk, she commanded. Ethan followed at her side, not overshadowing her, but reinforcing her strength, a silent wall of power. Across the room, Damon froze. The sight of Isabella radiant, fearless, adored was salt on his deepest wound. Not yet. She moved through the crowd like royalty, each step erasing the years of humiliation, each gaze confirming her rebirth. Tonight, Isabella Grant will not only be celebrated for her philanthropy, but she has also requested to make an announcement. A hush fell. Damon's chest tightened, suspicion flashing in his eyes. Isabella stepped up to the microphone, her crimson gown catching the light, her voice steady as she looked over the sea of faces. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I reveal a truth that will change everything you think you know about Damon Westwood. Every camera in the room zoomed in, every whisper ceased. Across the hall, Damon watched with narrowed eyes, his jaw tight, his forced smile stretched thin. Isabella took a breath, her heart pounding, but her voice was steady when it rang out. For years, she began, I lived in the shadow of a man who told me I was nothing without him. A man who believed his wealth gave him the right to control, humiliate, and discard. Tonight, I stand before you not as his wife, not as his victim, but as a woman who finally found her voice. He leaned forward, muttering under his breath, don't you dare. But Isabella continued, her gaze never faltering. You all saw what happened at the last gala. Damon Westwood tried to barge in and humiliate me. But what you didn't see was the desperation behind his anger. Damon Westwood is not the man he pretends to be. He is not the mogul he claims to be. Tonight, the truth comes out. She signaled with her hand. Screens around the ballroom flickered to life, projecting documents Ethan had helped her prepare, financial reports, emails, contracts, all displayed in vivid detail. These are records of Damon's last 3 business ventures. Deals he boasted about, deals he claimed were successes. In reality, they were failures propped up by borrowed money and lies. He falsified numbers, deceived investors, and lined his pockets while others lost everything. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A senator shifted uncomfortably. Whispers darted like sparks. Fraud. Damon shot to his feet, his voice booming. Lies. All lies. She forged those documents. Isabella turned her gaze on him, calm and sharp as glass. Really, Damon? Shall I play the recordings, too? The room stilled again. The color drained from Damon's face. Turn that off. Do you know who I am? The crowd erupted, a storm of outrage and disbelief. Investors stood, demanding explanations. A woman shouted, "You stole from us." People stood, clapping, cheering, some chanting her name, Isabella. Isabella. She was triumphing. Damon, however, was unraveling. But the room no longer listened to him. "No, Damon," Isabella said, her voice steady and final. Damon stumbled, his chest heaving, his eyes wild as if searching for an escape. She had done what no one thought possible. As security escorted him toward the doors, Damon twisted his head, his eyes locking onto Isabella. "This isn't finished, Isabella. You'll regret crossing me." Isabella stood tall, refusing to flinch. She had taken his power, exposed his lies, and reclaimed her dignity. Lawsuits piled high. Damon vanished into obscurity. Some whispered he fled the country. Others claimed he lived in exile under a false name. His shadow no longer touched her light. This time, it wasn't a celebration of wealth and vanity, but of charity, raising funds for recovery programs like the one that had saved Maria. Isabella was the honored speaker once more. Ethan sat in the front row, Maria beside him, both smiling with pride. Tonight, we celebrate not just survival, but rebirth. We celebrate the truth that no person is defined by the lies told about them. We are defined by our strength, our choices, and our courage to rise after the fall. The real triumph was reclaiming herself and building a life rooted in dignity, love, and truth. As the gala ended, Isabella stepped down from the stage, where Ethan extended his hand. She took it, her smile radiant, her heart steady. She squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of us." Isabella glanced at Maria, at Ethan, at the people waiting outside cheering her name. But she had risen stronger, wiser, and untouchable. A woman is never weak for being broken. And so, our story comes to a close. If you're still here with me right now, it means something in Isabella's journey touched your heart in a special way. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, or maybe it showed you that no matter how dark the night feels, the morning always comes. Isabella's story is proof that betrayal and pain don't have to define us. They can refine us. What truly matters is how we rise after the fall and how we choose dignity and courage over bitterness.